Okay, testing, 1, 2, 3. Assalamualaikum everyone. Alright, so today the lecture is on regional variation in language. So you can always refer and read in Yule's book from page 2802 286. It looks like there's only 6 pages, right? But actually, it consists of a lot of terms and a lot of linguistic terms that all of you need to understand. Okay. So at the end of this lesson, you will be able to answer what is variation in language, and the second one, who are the people who use pronunciation other than another? What are the situations which they choose one pronunciation rather than another? Whether it be due to their social class differences, or maybe due to their background, whether it be educational, economical, okay? And how does our way of speaking variation reflect our social identity? Is it positively or negatively? And how do people respond or react to these variations in language? Do they accept these variations? What do they think of these variations? Do they think that the variations are acceptable? And how do one cope when these variations are not acceptable by the larger community. Alright, so these are the objectives for today's lesson. Okay, so let's understand what is variation. So last class we have identified what is social dialects. Okay, so social dialects, also known as social lags, means groups defined by social factors. It can be from different socio-economic class, whether it's high or low, ethnicity, gender, and sometimes even age. Alright, so right now, for today's class, we want to focus on understanding regional dialects, and most of the time, regional dialects is defined through geographic locations of the said groups. Okay, so regional dialects is mostly identified by its linguistic, geographical um, factors. Okay, compared to social dialects defined by social factors, like I mentioned just now. Okay, so whenever we talk about understanding variations, we always have to compare with standard language. So what is standard language? Standard language, like the one we we had before in our previous class, we understand that standard language is where everyone is using the language, okay, whether it be in school, in literature, in mass media, okay, all of these public contexts, they are using or they use this standard language. So most of the time, standard language are recognized because of its systematic, and it's also used in both written and spoken form, but most of the time they are used in written form. So it's easier to identify standard language because of its systematic grammar, and also by the number of people who are using the language, hence standard language. In the last class, in our previous class, we have identified 3 to 4 methods of dialectology. Okay, so I want you to be able to recall what are the methods to identify a dialect. There are 3 to 4. What do we compare? Do we compare different languages, or do we compare different dialects? Okay, and then how does dialectology help linguists in their perspective language? In this case, we are not trying to find who's at fault, or which language is better, or which dialect is better compared to another, or which dialect or language is not good or not beneficial to its speaker. So dialectology help linguists in terms of how we can or how a speaker can benefit from using these languages. The aim is not to find which dialect or language is the best one, or is the or the worst one, but we want to be able to identify these dialects or language because of how they are used, and then what are the benefits contributed by these dialects or usage of dialects or language. So there's a lot of stereotypes when it comes to using dialects. Okay, people would say people who use dialects, they have uh, lower not status, lower level of education. Maybe they only finished primary school or secondary school. Sometimes they don't even go to secondary school. So these are the types of stereotypes. I remember Shira mentioned once that maybe the African American people, they are being stereotyped. Okay, and then the language and the language that they use, and they are being stereotyped because of their race, because of their skin color. Okay, so as a linguist, we need to be able to go beyond these stereotypes. Okay, we need to be able to fix these stereotypes. Okay, so a lot of linguists, many numbers of researchers have devoted a lot of survey research to the identification of consistent features of speech sound in one geographical area. Okay, so a lot of researchers, they have conducted survey research in order to identify these dialects based on consistent features of speech sound in one geographical area compared to another. So when we do research, okay, when these linguists do dialect survey, okay, so they need to have respondents. So normally in research, when we do research, we have to have respondents, okay, in order to get the results. So for example, if we are doing a research on smoking cigarettes among youth, so the respondents for the survey should be youth, not female, not someone older. Okay, not children below the age of 12. Okay, for example. So the respondents need to reflect the title itself. So in this case, when we are trying to identify a dialect, linguists most of the time, okay, they will choose norms, okay, NORMS, as their respondents. So who and what is norms? Okay, norms stands for N, non-mobile, O, older, R for rural, and M for male speakers. Okay, so why norms? Why do this? Why do they choose these four categories? Okay, of people as respondents for linguistic survey? Because number one, they are less likely to be influenced outside their region in their speech. So they have stayed there for a very long time. They traveled very little, so they don't have exposure to other languages. Therefore, they are able to maintain the language that they are using. So and another interesting fact is that norms are fluent in dialects but not in standard language. For example, if you go for as example, local example, Cantonese, they are very fluent in dialects, but when asked to speak using the standard Malay, they will be like some sort of um, a weirdness to it, because they can't speak a standard Malay or switch to standard Malay with ease. So these are examples of norms. You see, so most of the time they come from the rural area, older, because in terms of their experience and knowledge, non-mobile, they don't travel much, and male speakers compared to female speakers, because male speakers they are they are less likely to be influenced, whether it be emotionally or okay. So this is norms. Okay, so norms, they are usually referred to in linguistic survey in order to identify a dialect um, within a geographical area. Okay, but there are a few problems when it comes to this linguistic survey. Number one, it tends to be accurate a period well before the time of investigation, meaning different generation might have used the dialects differently. For example, what our grandma, okay, our grandparents, for example, our grandfather might use the dialects that he is familiar, but the grandchild might not be able to understand, because the grandchild has been exposed to a lot of changes in terms of new words. Okay, they have been exposed to new words. So however, in this research, whenever we try to do this research, it's always like not very up to date. Okay, it's a little backwards. By the time we have identified a certain a dialect, then it is already backdated, or it is already behind. Okay, so there's no up to date information or data, because dialects evolve just as rapid as language. Okay, so like for example, here grandfather, he uses the word tongval dialect for Dutch, but in his the grandchild is also speaking in dialect, but it's toval, because it can be due to exposure to language. Okay, because language just like language, dialects also evolve just as rapid. Okay, nevertheless, these surveys have contributed to the basis of linguistic classes. For example, in England, in country and region, for example, country in England and upper Midwest area of United States. Okay, let's take a look at this example. All right. The next step that I want to introduce you to is isogloss. Okay, isogloss is the line that represents the boundary between areas with differences in speech. Okay, the line that represents the boundary between areas with differences in speech. Okay, let's go through the term first. Okay, and the next one is, after you have identified the line, the isoglosses, once it has been identified as a group, then it is now called as dialect boundary. Okay, the more isoglosses you get, the easier you identify a dialect boundary. Okay, let's take another example of what is isogloss and dialect boundaries. Okay, let's take a look at this example. Okay, North Dakota, Minnesota, you see the dots here. South Dakota, Nebraska, and Iowa. Okay, you see the line there. Okay, can you see the line? Right, so there's a line there. So this line separates these two dialects. Okay, for example, the north, such as preference for pale to the north and bucket to the south. Okay, so people in the north side of the United States, they refer they use the word pale. Okay, but for those who living in the south, they use the word bucket. So how do we separate this? So we draw a line, so that line represents an isogloss. Okay, so we can this line can be drawn on the map, as you can see here. Okay, so the dots is the differences whether they use pail or bucket. Okay, when a number of isoglosses come together in this way, a more solid line, okay, that is the isogloss, indicating a dialect boundary, can be drawn. Okay, so interesting thing about isogloss is it is able to um, to separate, okay, these two different in dialects. Okay, so there's the term dialect geography means dialect is depends geographically. Isoglossus is the line that separates between the two dialects, and then dialect boundaries once the isoglossus identified, then we can see the dialect boundaries whether it be south or no, north or south. Okay, and then the next term that I want to introduce you to is dialect continuum. Okay, so let's take example of this one. So the merger of O and O here. So there's a contrast in production of O and O before T in cot and cot. Okay, so as you can see here, the pronunciation of h, okay, in cot is more distinct, so it is labeled using the green dots. Okay, so we can see like the green dots are more on the right side of the map, so we can draw the line, and then the red ones is more prominent in the left side of the map, so the isogloss is drawn in between these two in between the map, okay, in the middle of the map. Sometimes it can be look at the one the circle, okay, here. Okay, it doesn't mean that when one dialect is identified, like for example in Malacca, and then it cannot be found somewhere else. No, okay, it's not as rigid. Okay, it can be fluid. Sometimes people outside of Malacca can also be speaking the Malacca dialect. So this is the case. Hence the red dots on the right side of the map. Okay, so the dots is showing um, the the different use of dialects in this state. Okay, right. Okay, so what is dialect continuum? So drawing of isoglosses and dialect boundaries are useful in establishing one language or regional dialect to one geographical location. However, we have to remember that these isoglosses or dialect boundaries sometimes are uncertain or obscure. Okay, like this one, when you see the red circle here, and then you start to ask, meaning why are they group of people or group of community using these dialects when they are on the right side of the map. Okay, so this is called the dialect continuum. Okay, it's sometimes these isoglosses or dialect boundaries can be uncertain or obscure. So dialects spoken across some geographical area that only differ slightly from village to village, but over a long distance the differences become bigger, and that mutual intelligibility is not possible. Okay, let's go back to just now. Okay, meaning so when we when we identify these dialect boundaries, okay, like the one, like the red one in like the circle, okay, like the red circle, it's not as how do we say, you see, it's not like in a square shape. Okay, and the lines in the middle here, it's not a straight line, you see. because it's when we identify a dialect, it's not as precise like we have numbers, you know. It's not as sharp. Yeah, I would use the word sharp to describe. We cannot say, um, like for example, people in Negeri Sembilan, you see, when they reach Nilai, they stop using the certain dialects. No, okay. Sometimes Nilai is near to Putrajaya to Bangi, so sometimes people in Bangi or in Kajang or Putrajaya or in Semenyih, okay, these are the neighboring areas to Negeri Sembilan. Sometimes they can get affected to these dialects too. Sometimes they use these dialects too. Okay, so there's no something as sharp. It will not. So the Negeri Sembilan dialect will not stop just at Nilai. Sometimes it can be used. It can be used by these neighboring areas next to Nilai. And then when we move further from Nilai, okay, when we enter Kuala Lumpur, when we enter Shah Alam, then these dialects, okay, it gradually disappears. Okay, so what I want to say is um, continuum dialect means there's no sharp division. Okay, there's no sharp division on the dialect use. Okay, the neighboring areas of a geographical dialect there can still be using that dialect. Okay, when moving away from that dialect, or moving away from that geographical area, it will disappear. Okay, it will lose its dialect ability to. Okay. Another one is, okay, this is another example of dialect continuum. Dialect spoken across some geographical area that only differ slightly from village to village, but over a long distance, the differences become bigger, and that mutual intelligibility is not possible anymore. Okay, so when you move further from the uh, uh, a dialect, okay, in some geographical area, and it will loses its mutual intelligibility here. Okay, like for example, Arabic language and dialects. Okay, neighboring dialects might still understand each other. Okay, when these Arabic speakers, when they use dialects, the neighboring countries might still, or the neighboring village, okay, might still be able to communicate and understand each other, but once further away in Moroccan or Syria, might not be able to understand these Arabic dialects anymore, even though they are speaking the same language. But when there are dialects involved, then they might not be able to understand it anymore. So moving away from this geographical area, they will lose this ability to understand each other. Okay, so this is called the dialect continuum. Slowly, okay, gradually loses mutual intelligibility. Okay, so the next term is dialectal. Okay, bidialectal is an interesting one where a person is able to speak two dialects. Okay, we have heard a person who's able to speak two languages. They are called bilingualism. But a person who speak two dialects, they are known as bidialectal. Okay, so these people normally they travel back and forth between these borders, and they may switch varieties with ease. Um, let's think of an example of a local example, like for example negeri Penang and Kedah. For example, if one person, like for example Amni, if she travels Penang and Kedah at all times, between Penang and Kedah at all times, she might switches between these two dialects without knowing, you know, unconsciously. Sometimes maybe she can sometimes even confuse using Penang dialects in Kedah because it sounds similar, and also now it's already because she is already fluent in both dialects. Okay, but there are also other types of dialects, for example street dialect. Okay, so for example youth, when they talk to their family and friends, they use the street dialect, but they will use another dialect in school. It can be formal and informal types of dialect. Okay, so there are two types of bi dialectal. Okay, like this one comparing the obvious one between two states. Okay, or street and more informal or formal dialects. Okay, so just now speakers of two dialects, they are known as bidialectal. Uh, s- how and another one, speakers of two languages, they're known as bilingual. So I think it is safe to say that most of us here, we are bilingual speakers of Malay and English language. Okay, and another example of bilingual, but the official country who are known officially as a bilingual country is Canada. Okay, so Canada's official languages, there are two: English and French. Okay, um, but in the United States, okay, let's try take a look at the idea of bilingualism in United States. So, in United States, bilingualism tends to be a feature of minority group. Okay, the larger community or the native speaker of English language in United States, they normally don't know any languages other than the English language. Okay, so if you know, for example, you're an American citizen, and if you know to speak other languages, for example, Spanish, meaning you have another influence. Okay, for example, Spanish youth, for example, a Spanish boy, he can speak two languages. Okay, he's bilingual. He can speak Spanish, and at the same time, he can speak American language or English language. The reason why it is because his roots or his parents are from are from countries who speak Spanish language. However, he is born in the States, so he learns and speaks Spanish from parents. At the same time, he learns English to take part in the larger community. For example, to take part in education like school, or also for work purposes. Okay, so as you can see here, there are different definition of bilingualism. Okay, it can either be a person who can speak uh, two languages, okay, and both these languages are dominant. Okay, but in the United States, okay, bilingualism means um, it is defined for a minority group, whereas they can speak two languages, okay, for example Spanish and English, due to their backgrounds. Okay, and they learn English because they need to take part in the larger community. Alright, next one is an example of bilingualism, English and Welsh. So, the minority who speak Welsh never see any signs, books, or programs in the public domain. Okay, so from here we can understand, like, okay, Welsh sounds like a vernacular, because vernacular language, they are not written. Okay, you can find vernacular languages only in spoken form. So this is an example for Welsh language, whereas the minority who speak Welsh never see any science book or programs in the public domain. Okay, over time, people become bilingual and science in both languages become widespread. For example, the grandma teaches her grandchildren Welsh language. At the same time, the grandchildren are also fluent in the English language. Therefore, the grandchildren becomes bilingual. Okay, and then these children, they grow up, and then they are still using and still communicating with ease between these two languages. And now the country, for example, even the science, okay, they have it in two languages. For example, so Henot here is a Welsh language, and at the same time elderly people in English language. Okay, so minority bilingualism usually only in spoken form, okay, and majority bilingualism both written and spoken form. In terms of English and Welsh language here, now it has become majority bilingualism. Initially, it was just minority bilingualism, whereas Welsh is only used in spoken form. But nowadays, if you go there, you can see both languages in written and spoken form. Okay, so just now we talked about bilingualism, English and Welsh. Right now we want to focus on individual or group bilingualism. Okay, so individual or group bilingualism is not a result of political dominance or geographical or economical or different achievement in terms of education, no, but it is simply a result of two parents who speak two different languages. Okay, for example, the mom speaks Spanish and the dad speaks Chinese. Okay, so the bilingual speaker can shift seamlessly between these two languages. However, due to social factor, okay, they might choose one language to be a dominant one. So just a normal human being to be able to shift seamlessly at all times might be difficult. Okay, so but due to social factor, due to the environment, this child, he needs to choose one language to be a dominant one. Okay, so for example, in Spanish speaking country, so the speaker speaks in Spanish most of the time but switches to Chinese when speaking with his dad. Okay, so this is an example of individual or group bilingualism. It's not a result of failed political a failed system ke, no, but it is simply a result of two parents who speak two different languages, and they have to choose one language to be a dominant one. Okay, right. Next one is dysglossia. Okay, so what is dysglossia? Dysglossia is two distinct variety of language consists of high and low variety. Okay, an example, a good and excellent example of dysglossia is in Arab countries, in using Arabic language. Okay, if you attend formal lectures in universities or political events or religious events, the speakers will use classical Arabic, and classical Arabic is considered as high variety in Arab countries. Okay, however, if you go to the local market, okay, you might not be able to understand the language that they are using, or because they are using low variety, and these varieties are uh, they have huge difference. Okay, so you need to be able, so an Arab speaker need to be able to switch between these varieties easily in order to adapt to these different occasions. Okay, when you at the market, you don't normally use the high, or you don't use classical Arabic, but in formal lectures you use you don't use market or a local market Arabic due to the nature of the event. Okay, so dysglossia is a two distinct variety of language, consists of high and low variety. Okay, now, okay, I promise this is the last one. So language planning. Okay, after all of this understanding, and then after all these terms, and after all the research that have been conducted and a linguistic survey, after the linguistic surveys have been conducted, now you have identified the isogloss, the dialect boundaries, the dialect continuums, and also the different types of varieties, whether it is high or low. Now it's time. Okay, now it is time for that country to plan which language should be used as national language. Okay, so these are the steps in language planning. Consist of 5 steps. The first one is selection. So the idea is to choose a national language. Okay, how do we choose a national language? We cannot just vote for one language. No, it has to go through several steps. The first step is codification. Okay, it has to be based on um, mutual understanding of basic grammars, dictionaries, and written models. So these basic grammars, dictionaries, and written models, they serve as guidelines, okay, to establish a standard variety. Okay, the next one, elaboration. The next step is elaboration. So the chosen variety is further developed and used in all aspects of life. Okay, for example, in school, in official government, and also in literature. So we want to make sure that everyone is using the chosen variety. Okay, implementation. So the government needs to encourage the people the use of the standard language in order to select a national language. And then last but not least, the acceptance. Okay, substantial majority of people in the country must use the language in all aspects, okay, socially and nationally. So what happens when you don't plan, okay, for language learning? What could happen? For example, it could be, yeah, we could have disagreements, okay, like for example in there was once a war in the Philippines. It's known as national language wars because they could not decide um, which language should be the Philippine national language. Is it Tagalog or is it Filipino? Okay, so because they didn't go through the language planning process, the people are unhappy and unsatisfied when it comes to choosing which language should be Philippines national language. Okay, another effect another effect of um, failing to follow the language planning steps is, for example, in Guatemala, a country in Central America. So in Guatemala, there's a community, the Mayans community, and this community, they have 26 Mayan spoken languages. Okay, they have 26. However, the education, the Ministry of Education have decided that in early education, like in preschool and um, in in primary school, they have chosen Spanish as the main language in schools in Guatemala. So as a result, a lot of Mayan younger generation uh, is at educational disadvantage. So they cannot um, learn really well because of these language boundaries. Okay, so this is why language planning is essential. Okay. Okay, I think that is all. If you have any questions, please do let me know. I've also attached, I'm going to send you a Google form which has questions for today's lecture. So please let me know if you have questions and then submit um, uh, the homework before our class on next Tuesday, 11:30 a.m. Alright, so I think that is all. Thank you very much for listening. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi taala wabarakatuh.